What's up, squad? It's Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to chime in on the latest controversy with presidential candidate Nikki Haley being asked the question around the contributing cause of the Civil War. And she gave a pretty fair answer, in my opinion, where she talks about the role of government. Now, what she's being harangued over is that she didn't say that the primary cause or the sole cause of the Civil War was slavery. And that's because it wasn't. Now, I wanted to talk about this because you can see the machine coming in. Nikki Haley's been gaining in the polls. And of course, her competitors are trying to warp this to make it seem like she cursed Jesus. And the Democrats are probably putting this in her back pocket if they can get Trump out the race and she becomes the primary presidential candidate, that this will turn off a lot of down the road or middle of the road voters from her and get them to lean towards the Democratic candidate. But if you think about this, not from the hype media point of view, where the media is telling you what to think, but sit back and look at the actual actions and reactions that occurred around this time, you will see that states' rights was pretty much the primary contributing factor of the Civil War, and a byproduct of that, a major tenet of states' rights, is the role of slavery as well as the role of economics. And it always comes down to economics in some sort of fashion because people want to get paid. There's a famous quote by Abraham Lincoln where he talks about if he can keep the Union together and free some of the slaves and keep some enslaved, he will do so. If he can keep the Union together and free all the slaves, he would do so. And if he can keep the Union together and free none of the slaves, he would do so. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, but he was what some could consider a white nationalist. And there's probably a 50-50 chance that if Lincoln was to have not been assassinated, there would have been a bigger scheme to resettle African slaves or free former African slaves back into Africa or a portion of the United States. But he was assassinated, and lo and behold, that never eventualized. But he did not believe that there was necessarily a role for the Africans in America. So, especially of a free nature. So, when you had the Civil War, don't forget, Andrew Jackson had a Southerner himself. The South was getting rowdy. The North and the South were divergent economically, right? Both parties' countries came up through the use of raw materials, but the South became a lot more industrialized due to their demographics and the industrial centers and a lack of fertile land, such as the South. So the South really grew out of this plantation economy, and the South kept going more southern. So initially, what was the South, we would consider Virginia being the heartland and the borderland. But in South Carolina, once you had the Caribbean planters come on and the cotton money, the rice money, and the cotton money started to take off, the plantation economy quickly spread to Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. So the South was pretty much getting filthy rich. And what they would do is they would take the raw products and they would ship it up the North, and the North would export and refine it. And of course, these raw products were being taxed at a different rate than the refined products in the North. And of course, the South thought this was a raw deal. So there was already rebellions in the South. Andrew Jackson, who was himself a Southerner, a slaveholder, had sent troops down to the South to quell rebellion. And that energy was already there. So when Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, which the Republicans had already been a party of anti-slavery, this had been one of their tenets, when he came in, the South thought there was going to be even more draconian rules placed upon them. One is how their property rights, which they believed slaves were their property at the time, how their property rights would be affected. Now, if Civil War was solely about slavery, the North would have taken the aggressive route. Remember, the Civil War started because of the South Carolinian attack on Fort Sumter. These South Carolinians, and this is one of the things that get missed in history, is these South Carolinians, they were of a different stock. They were not from the homeland, coming from the major migration centers in the UK at the time. They had came from Caribbean plantation economies. A lot of them came from second, third sons that couldn't inherit the property in Barbados. And some of them came and they settled in South Carolina, and the plantation economy took off. So the ethos, they weren't cavaliers or loyalists like the Virginians. They weren't bankers or financiers like the Dutchmen of New Amsterdam, New York. They weren't the religiously persecuted, such as the Pilgrims and Puritans that had, or Quakers that landed in the Northeast, such as in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. They were already heavily big in the plantation economy, the slave economy of the Caribbean, and they took that mindset as well as that individualistic attitude to America when they settled in the United States. And this is the big reason why South Carolina was the state that this really popped off at, is because of this different lineage. The United States was not homogenous. It was an aggregation. And it was this split of mindsets where the South Carolinians was like, we never really recognized your authority on us. We're making money down here. We're doing things our way. 7 or 8 out of the top 15 slaveholders were in South Carolina at the time. So when Lincoln was elected, the South Carolinians, fearing that they would be taxed more, their economy will be punished more than their counterparts in the North, they felt the only way to ensure their economic liberty in their eyes was to succeed from the North. And that is why in the South, in some areas, it's not called the Civil War. It's called the War of Northern Aggression, because it is seen as the North actually coming down there to impose their will. And what you have at the end of the Civil War is Northerners coming down to capitalize on industries, which people in politics, and some people refer to them as carpetbaggers. So the reason why I wanted to go into those nuances, because they're not going to go into those nuances in the mainstream media. And this is obviously a triggered issue, because this is how American politics is done. It's talking about everything except how to benefit the individual today in their life, saying dog whistle words and buzzwords to try to get people to pop. I'm absolutely agnostic about Nikki Haley's campaign, whether she wins or loses. I'm no concern to me. But when I see these games being played, I want to call out how the moneyed interests and how these big players in the political circles, how they use their influence to create a narrative to drive the herd. So that's my thoughts. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Please comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, take care. Bantu up.